Why are our hormones declining more and more earlier and earlier? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I am known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today, I am so excited to present an interview I did with Dr. Carrie Jones, who is very well known for being one of the inventors of the Dutch test, which if you've ever had to have your hormones checked, I think the Dutch test is always going to be the gold standard. She is absolutely hilarious and has a really fun social media. I'll make sure to link that in the information section below for you guys. So make sure you give her a follow. But we talk about how mitochondrial health and hormone health are really declining, how puberty is happening earlier and earlier, and how as we get into perimenopause and menopause, the body is changing and what we can actually do about that. There are so many misconceptions when it comes to our hormones and what we need to do as we age. We tried to really bust a lot of those myths and clear up a lot of that confusion, because I know a lot of people in my audience struggle with hormonal issues, and that can just cause all kinds of havoc, like depression, issues with sleep, just moodiness, weight gain, and a whole bunch of other things. So I do, again, hope this episode was helpful. There are tons of timestamps linked in the information section below for you guys. So if you want to navigate through two different topics, make sure to check those out. Those timestamps are going to be brought to you by my two sponsors today. The first one is going to be Optimal Carnivore, and I'm really excited about this brand new product they just came out with called Brain Nourish. Now, we've actually been taking it for the last month here in our house, and we have all noticed an increase in memory, in focus, and even in creativity, just a little bit more excitement in the mornings. And I don't drink any coffee, a lot of you guys know. So this is about 1,500 milligrams of lion's mane, which I don't really consider a supplement. It is a mushroom, as well as 1,500 milligrams of beef brain. And I think it is a really powerful thing to do for your brain health. I love this product. You can use my code Carnivore, uppercase Y, to save 10% on this over on Amazon. So check that out. Check out the new Brain Nourish product. And the second sponsor of today's episode is going to be Upgraded Formulas. As I love their magnesium, but I really love their hair tissue mineral analysis, because again, I'm really not a fan of taking supplements that you just don't need. And with that hair tissue mineral analysis, you can actually see what's been going on in your body over the last 60 to 90 days versus a blood test, which really only gives you a snapshot in time. So some people are taking way too many supplements. I agree. I was one of those for many years. And some people are really off balance with minerals and need to supplement for a little bit of time to get back in balance. So that hair tissue mineral analysis with a consultation from Upgraded Formulas is a great way to take control. And you can use my code YOGI12 or Yogi to save on either one of those on their website. Quick little note, my 3-day circadian kickstart is still 50% off. You can get that in the show notes below for a limited time. And I am doing the first and only group coaching event I have done in over a year called the 21-day leptin reset. We will have multiple Zoom calls, a group, and it's a 21-day video course that can be done to help you get control of those hunger signals. So check those out in the show notes, and I will talk with you guys again soon. Have a great day. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming back and tuning in to today's episode. I am very thrilled to have with me today Dr. Carrie Jones, who is an expert on hormones, the Dutch test, just so many things, perimenopause, menopause, and just a wealth of information. So we are really lucky to have her here today. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about my favorite subject, hormones.
Yay. Yeah. And I think, anyone who doesn't follow you on social media, I'll make sure to put that into the show notes so they can. But you just have such a really fun way of explaining, what our bodies go through and this whole hormonal process on your Instagram page. Like, your reels are just amazing.
I figured out a long time ago that, hormones are like herding cats. I feel like sometimes. And we didn't get taught a lot about hormones. A lot of us didn't, right? Growing up. In fact, I say this all the time. I was taught about, health class or sex ed class. Mine was taught by my football coach, like the high school or middle school football coach. And again, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places. So, but a lot of people can relate. They're like, yeah, I didn't learn any about this. And so I don't know if talking about hormones is taboo. I don't know what's normal. I don't know what's not normal. I'm like, no, it's very relatable. We're just going to make it funny and relatable, because then once you know what to expect, then you can do something about it.
Yeah. And I feel, we were talking before I turned the camera on, most of my audience is 35 and older. I would say the majority of them are in their 40s and 50s. And I have all these ladies that are kind of following me in my audience, and just wonderful ladies. And a lot of them have never been taught about their hormones. And then the other side of that is that they've been fear mongered into ever doing any kind of hormone replacement. So they're suffering, they're miserable. They're not sure what the heck is going on since they turned 40 and older. And then they're afraid to really do much about it. So I'm hoping you can talk about some of that stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I actually, when I was in practice, I had this one wonderful patient. She was in her 50s and she had gotten divorced, and she'd really, started, dating again. And she would come in just literally to learn anatomy and physiology, like to understand, like, okay, I'm going through menopause. Like, what does this mean? And how does this relate to my dating life? And what do I need to know? And she would just come in and we'd have these wonderful conversations, because she's like, nobody taught me. I didn't know. I was married for years. Somehow I managed to have children. I didn't really understand how it worked, but here we are. And so I thought, the majority of women are probably like this, headed in their 40s and 50s, no idea what this change is and what it's doing, to all parts of their body.
Yeah. And, I feel like it's starting maybe even a little bit younger, like women in their late 30s, mid 30s. When I was 35, I remember I felt so exhausted, raising a special needs child and working and just doing all the things. And I went to have my hormones tested, because that's what I'm like, I'm going to just test my hormones. And number one, I didn't know you're supposed to test specific hormones on specific days, one.
Yeah.
And then when we did actually test my testosterone, it was like at a 5 when I was only like 35, and my DHEA was really low. And I just didn't know what that meant. My doctor was like, well, you could take some testosterone cream if you wanted to. And I'm like, I don't think that's a really great idea at 35.
Right. And what does that mean?
Right. What's that going to do?
Yeah.
So why do you think a lot of women, and I know so many women, that their hormones are just kind of like flatlining so much earlier? Do you think there's a reason for that for a lot of women?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's some of the similar reasons that we notice that puberty is happening a lot
Earlier.
younger, but right, a lot earlier comparatively, from decades ago. And the average age of puberty was 17 or 18 decades ago. And now the average age is quite a bit younger, like 11, 12, somewhere in there. I think it's, I'd have to go back and look in the stats, but I think it's like 12 for a developed country. And no one will point the finger. No one knows 100%, but a lot of the research that I read looks at endocrine disruptors, and then the things we're exposed to at large, toxins. And then it's for us in heading into perimenopause, stress. Our ovaries, we're born with a certain amount of follicles. Now, having said that, there is very cool research to show that we have some stem cell ability in our ovaries, meaning it's totally possible that science will figure out how to activate these little stem cells to get us to have more follicles. And for those who don't know, the follicles contain the egg. And so they also contain the cells that make the hormones. So a follicle is like a complete system. It has the egg inside, and then as it grows bigger, it's capable of making estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, et cetera. So right now, if humans we're born with the amount of follicles we have, because we haven't quite figured out the whole stem cell thing. Our follicles are extremely sensitive to toxins, damage, stress, et cetera, all because of what we think. This is what we're current sort of theory is the mitochondria in there. We have a lot of mitochondria in our ovaries. Our mitochondria, as we learned in school, are cellular powerhouses, but they're also the first stop to making hormones. Believe it or not, our mitochondria make energy, but you also start to make estrogen there and progesterone and cortisol, et cetera, out of our mitochondria. To make hormones, the act of making a hormone, unfortunately, doesn't come out without consequences. So to make an estrogen requires you also make something called a reactive oxygen species. Basically, it's little fires. You get little fires every time you make a hormone. And these little fires have to get put out by, firemen and firewomen that come in and sort of quench the fire. But if you don't have enough fire trucks to come in and put out the fire, so to speak, which we call antioxidants, then it does damage to the follicle or can advance aging of our ovaries. And because as humans, whether it's our food chain, our water supply, the air we breathe, the stress we're under, our skincare, our hair care, our, household products, et cetera, over time, one of the leading theories or plausible theories is that these are taking a toll on our ovaries, other parts of our body too, but our ovaries, and it's aging the ovaries a little faster than we would like. Now, is this everyone? Of course not. In fact, I just got a DM on Instagram from a woman who's 53 and said, I cycle completely regularly every 28 days on the dot. She's like, when will it stop? Like, when will I hit menopause? I'm like, I bet genetics plays a big role there. I bet her mom and sister and grandmother, et cetera, went into menopause, what we consider later. 51 is the average age in the US. But you're right. I think a lot of women are at least hormonally concerned as they head into their mid to late 30s. We're saying like, okay, mid to late 30s, perimenopause is starting. The act of perimenopause is starting. But I also think it's important to separate, is it perimenopause or is it just general hormone chaos that we need to clean up? Are you really perimenopausal at 35, or is it a lot of other stuff that's affecting your ovaries? And if we address that, then you'd probably have 5 or 10 more years before you really felt the symptoms of menopause.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I started having irregular periods and really painful periods right around 35. And that's when I checked my hormones. I had to make major lifestyle changes and change my diet. That's when I went to a paleo diet. And I had had tons of fibroids at that time when I was about 35. And my doctor was like, let's just take them all out because they're causing you all this pain. But she's like, you're going to have to address what caused those in the first place. And so that's when I totally changed my diet and lifestyle. And they've never come back since then. And things regulated, got a lot better. And so I do think, instead of just telling a woman who's 35, that's perimenopause, too bad, we should, look at things like lifestyle and diet. I think that they can fix those things. But when we look at a woman who's like 45, yes, we still need to address lifestyle, but there's going to be some things that are a little bit more inevitable, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that your doctor said, like, we can remove the fibroids, but you have to address why you have them there in the first place. And it's the same for any hormonal symptom that you have sort of below the age of 40, 45. Because I think what happens is a lot of practitioners do say, well, that's to be expected at your age. Like, for example, that's to be expected at your age because, you have 2 children or whatever, you have 3 children, or that's to be expected of your age because of, what's going on in the world. Or here's the birth control pill, like if you really want to do something about this, like here's just the pill. So and I'm not against the birth control pill. It has a time and a place, but I do think, like, you figured out the why behind yours. You figured out by, working very hard on, diet, lifestyle, et cetera, that your hormones got a whole lot better. You didn't need the birth control pill. And so It does drive me a little crazy when the pill is handed out like candy but nothing else is encouraged to change for the better. Now, yes, once you hit into your 40s and the little follicles in your ovaries are, because just age, they don't communicate as well as they used to. Like, they're not as healthy as they used to. It's just like the health of your skin on your face. We get older, like we can tell we're aging. It's the same with the follicles in our ovaries. They're getting older with us. And so they don't have the flexibility or the communication, the ability to respond to our brain like we used to. And we're losing them. We're getting less and less and less as we get older. So it's a communication healthy or aging issue. And then it's a lack of number issue. And so we in our 40s, I'm in my 40s, start to feel that chaos a lot more.
Absolutely. And, our adrenals, our ovaries are starting to kind of bow out a little bit. So the adrenals take over a little bit more. Can we talk about how that process goes down?
Yeah. So imagine a really, really, really key important worker at your job who's been there, you know, from 14 years old until 45 years old, quits. Just like, I'm done, I'm out, I'm not gonna do this anymore. And you throw that partner, you throw that colleague a party, and then instead of hiring in their position again, nothing is dispersed. None of their job duties are dispersed. You don't actually replace them with anybody, and it leaves a major gap. And that's what happens as the ovaries go into menopause. So the adrenals aren't really told to pick up the slack. You would think in our design system, somebody would, help pick it up, but that doesn't happen. So we eke out a tiny bit of progesterone from our adrenal glands, but it's nothing compared to what the ovaries make. And we do make estrogen. We can convert testosterone into estrogen in what we call our peripheral tissue. So like our adipose tissue, our fat tissue, and some other tissues. So we can make estrogen, but not like we would make it out of our ovaries. And on top of it, our adrenals are busy. We've had a stressful life. We have a lot going on, like they're handling your day to day, and adrenal glands, the hormones your adrenals make, cortisol being a big one. Cortisol handles inflammation. It's anti-inflammatory to a point, and cortisol deals with your blood sugar. It increases glucose when you're stressed out. It manages, helps with the stress response. It decreases infection, and like it's busy. And so it's not going to suddenly become your ovaries 2.0, which is why a lot of women go into perimenopause, menopause, and get slammed like they've been slammed by a truck, because they don't have healthy adrenals to prop them up. The adrenals are struggling, and then they just lost the key worker of the ovaries.
Yeah. And why do you think their adrenals, so many of them are struggling? Do you think it's our
yes
circadian rhythms, environment,
yes. All the things? Yeah. Because think about it, for a lot of women in their 40s, if they have kids, so if you started having kids later in life, your children are young, but you're in your 40s, which can be taxing. And if you had children younger in life, your children are probably graduating from high school or they're in college. And so it's big transitions, right? It's graduations, it's leaving the nest, it's going off to college, university, et cetera. And then in our 40s, we're usually, if we're in the workforce, we're kind of at the pinnacle of our career. So we're been in it a while. We're considered an expert, right? Like we're maybe climbing the ladder or at a pretty high peak in the ladder, depending on your field. And it's also a transition for a lot of our parents. Our parents are getting older. Our parents might be in their 70s or 80s or even older. And so now we're in our 40s trying to parent, trying to be in the workforce, and then having to deal with the fact that we have aging parents who are having their own struggles as well. On top of, our world is kind of a mess. Our world is kind of a mess. So even in our internal family, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of balls in the air we have to deal with. And then our outside world is not exactly what I would call stable. And on top of that, you add in, you stay up late on your phone, you're watching, videos, you're watching TikTok or Instagram, you're not sleeping as well as you should or could, because your hormones are kind of in disarray. You're living on caffeine all day. Maybe you're not eating like you should. You're not hydrating like you should, et cetera, et cetera. And it just compounds over time until you hit your 40s and you're what we call the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, isn't loving life right now. We don't feel good. We're tired.
Right. And a lot of people also never really get a lot of bright light in the mornings unless they're laying in their bed looking on their phone, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to do.
Yeah.
As far I think it's, to me, learning about circadian biology more and more over the last year, because that's been another rabbit hole of mine. I think that looking at your phone first thing in the morning is almost as bad as drinking a cup of coffee right off.
Right.
I don't know if you...
Right. And a lot of people do it. They get up and immediately grab their phone. Exactly. They scroll through social media or their emails or what have you for a little bit in bed, or they come downstairs and make coffee or go get coffee right away. And and then they can't understand why they're tired all the time and they're not sleeping that well. And maybe they've got some weight gain, especially around the middle, right? That blood sugar, glucose stress weight gain as opposed to in the booty or in the hips. It's more the spare tire look. And then it just perpetuates as we get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And what role it's all mitochondrial health that we're talking about, right? And people, I think they kind of blur out a little bit when you start talking about mitochondrial health, but
yeah,
it's another one of my favorite rabbit holes. But mitochondria and the adrenal cells are what's making cortisol, correct? So if your mitochondrial function is going down, which after we turn 25, naturally it starts declining. But if we're doing all these other things to rapidly decline our mitochondria, it's like fighting an uphill battle, correct?
Yeah, cortisol. So all the other hormones, estrogen, all the steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, their first step is in the mitochondria, and then they actually move out into next door into the endoplasmic reticulum. So they finish out next door. Cortisol starts and finishes in the mitochondria. So the first step occurs in the mitochondria, they slip out next door to the endoplasmic reticulum, come back in and finish out as cortisol. So the mitochondria are even doubly important, you could say, for that cortisol production, because it's the first and last stop of the factory to make cortisol. So if your little mitochondria, and they're high maintenance, I mean, they just are, they are heavily influenced by everything. They damage very easily. It's like handling a glass ball, but what happens inside that glass ball is critically important to being a human. Again, not only for our ATP production, making energy, but our hormone production as well. So a lot of things in our life crack the glass, are full on shatter the glass. And then that, of course, leads to a lot of problems, not only with ATP production in the body to power the human body, but our cortisol to deal with stress, energy, inflammation, infection, glucose can become dysregulated as well.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And what kind of things do you tell people to do to improve their mitochondrial health? So kind of going back to the root cause, what are your favorite things to have people do?
So the great thing is, like, pretty much all the healthy things you can think of, save the mitochondria. So you can't go wrong in what you do. The mitochondria, while being sort of breakable or delicate like glass, they are also repairable. So when you have an unhealthy mitochondria, they have a couple of options that they can do. So they can literally push all the bad parts. So if there's stuff inside the mitochondria that's broken or not working well, it can push it to the side and literally segment it off. So think of a body like you're going to put all the bad cells in your arm and you're just going to cut off the arm and be done with it. So the rest of the body is healthy, but all the junk is in the arm and it gets kicked out. But unfortunately, now we're human with no arm. So what do? Well, the next thing is called biogenesis. So the mitochondria can see another mitochondria and be like, hey, I'm missing my right arm and you're missing your left arm. And if we join together, we'll be bigger, better, stronger, and have a right and left arm. They're very smart. So they can do that. And what's great is that your mitochondria do that under things like sunlight or red light therapy. We were talking about infrared light therapy before this. With a number of antioxidants are really helpful for that. So we think of like vitamin C, vitamin E, and zinc, and our green tea and our resveratrol, and then all the foods, the colors of the rainbow, our berries and our grapes, and those colorful skins are really helpful for that. Thankfully, thank you God, dark chocolate can be helpful for that. I've read an article about what are called polyphenols in dark chocolate. It does have to be dark. Milk and white chocolate don't count, but those polyphenols can be helpful. Cold therapy, what we call cold thermogenesis, so cold plunges. I'm even in support, because some people are like, I live in an apartment, I can't, like, where am I going to plunge? I'm like, take a cold shower. Finish your shower on cold, get 30 seconds to a minute on cold, or alternate, cold and warm, get that contrast. Every little bit can be helpful. Exercising, building muscle. You have a lot of mitochondria in your muscles. So lifting weights, not cardio. I mean, exercise, walking and cardio and stuff is good for you. It's the actual weight building that's going to help support your mitochondria. Sleep. Well, obviously, getting quality sleep. It's where we repair, humans heal and repair during our sleep primarily, which is why it's so important that we get good uninterrupted sleep and hit all our sleep cycles. So that's just like a smattering. The list is huge on what supports our mitochondria, which is what's so wonderful. But like I said, being delicate like glass, we also want to evaluate our labels, our ingredients. What do you put on your skincare every day? What do you put in your hair? What kind of shampoo do you use? What are you washing your clothes with? Why is your house surrounded by candles that are off-gassing fragrance?
Oh
You know,
gosh.
like,
Yeah.
why do
Yeah.
you have this smell good tree hanging off your rearview mirror in your car? Like, you sure about that? Like, that's a lot
Yeah.
of phthalates that are coming out of there.
Yes.
Using glass containers. Do you use plastic water bottles? You know, all these things, these little things over time add up. And you don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. It took me a lot of years to comb through everything I have and really work on it. But it's these little things do make a dent over time. I'm sure you have too. I've had a lot of women say to me, they even did things like switch to all 100% organic, tampons or pads, and their cramps got better. Like their periods got better. Their fibroids stopped growing just because they weren't using the heavily bleached conventional, feminine hygiene products. Now, obviously that won't work for everybody, but you don't think about that. You're like, crap, my period started. You run to the store, you grab a box.
Right.
And then now, I'm encouraging everyone go for the 100% cotton, go for the unbleached as much as you can. So I just listed off a lot of things, but there's a lot more, which is so wonderful that your mitochondria can repair.
I mean, it's kind of like opening up like a rabbit hole when you start understanding how these things affect your hormones, and just, you do make these little changes. Like, I'm like, oh, we should do a different dish detergent. We should do a different laundry detergent. We should, put shower filters on all the showers. And it's like, for us, it's just been gradual. My husband's kind of gotten used to it at this point. At first he thought I was crazy, but now he's like, oh yeah, like this is water that I'm drinking out of my Yeti, because I will not drink out of a plastic bottle. We get water delivered in glass to the house. And like, there's a lot of stuff that we do because I have to explain to him how it affects, I know we're talking about women's hormones, but it affects men's hormones as well. And I know
100%.
Things like, not getting enough sleep at night for men can knock their testosterone down. And that when you start talking to your husband,
I don't think men realize that. Two things. One, our melatonin comes out of our pineal gland at night. And melatonin is as potent of an antioxidant as what like glutathione. Glutathione is considered the most potent antioxidant we have. I love melatonin.
I think it's melatonin.
I argue it's melatonin. Melatonin has been around for billions of years with a B, billions. And I'm like, that girl has seen a thing or two. So she knows a thing or two, as the commercial says. And all our mitochondria, it's now been proven, our mitochondria make melatonin within themselves. It stays in the glass bubble. It doesn't really, as far as we know, contribute to our systemic melatonin. But the reason the mitochondria are smart, they were like, you know what? Melatonin is an amazing, like fire truck to put out the fires. So it just makes it right inside. But so one, for men, including men, don't get a lot of sleep at night if they're up gaming or they can't sleep or they up with a new baby or they're up working or whatever. They're not going to get that melatonin to heal and repair for their hormones. But two, men make testosterone through the night. That's when they make it. It's why men should wake up with an erection, because they just pumped out a whole lot of testosterone through the night. It's really important. It goes hand in hand. And they showed even cutting their sleep down to 5 hours. It was a small study, but they said even cutting sleep down for 5 hours, short term, will cut testosterone to 15%. And now do it night after night after night, which a lot of men do. And
they do. That's the only way I got my husband to start like having better night hygiene. He still won't wear blue blockers, but I have a setup at the house where we have like red bulbs everywhere. And there's a big filter over the TV, like a red filter over the TV. Like I'm crazy, but I can't get him to do that. But I've explained the testosterone thing, and he stopped complaining about having to, throw out all the plastic and go to bed on time. Cause I'm like, you're going to mess up your testosterone. He's like, oh.
like, yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
lose your hair. And like, I scared him into it that
Right.
way.
Have erectile issues. I mean, it's already,
Exactly.
men already expect it to happen just because of, media once they hit their 50s. But what we're finding is that men are actually having all these symptoms young, late 20s, early
Teenagers.
30s. Yeah,
Yeah. It's
absolutely.
crazy.
And so it really is hitting, I think, home a lot more. I mean, women have always understood hormonal issues. They may not understand their hormones, but because we get our period in puberty, we are introduced to
Goes
hormones
missing. We're like,
way sooner than a male might think there's something wrong with me. But now, because of a lot of this, plus when you throw in toxins on top of it, it's, really affecting the cells in their testicles.
Yeah. And just jumping back to melatonin, do you think a lot of girls are getting puberty a lot earlier because they don't have as much melatonin because a lot of them are on devices and exposed to a lot of artificial lights at all? Do you think that's any kind of a contributing factor to that?
It's totally possible. It's totally possible. There's so much really, so the nerd in me, there's so much good research about women going through puberty earlier. It's also super scary for me to read this article where they talk about, the endocrine disruptors, even mold. I was reading an article yesterday about, I forget which of there's like 3 big mycotoxins. One of them they've shown, it's a rat study, but they showed that this mycotoxin, because of its effect on hormones, was having rats go through puberty a whole lot sooner. And, with teenagers, you add the toxins in, which are endocrine disruptors, and our periods is our endocrine system. So let's not disrupt that. Coupled with, I would agree with you, I think high stress. I think our teenagers have always had a lot of stress, but there's so much with social media now. It's out of control. Then they're not sleeping because you're right. They're up on their devices late at night. Most of the time they're not doing good sleep hygiene, coupled with diet. I mean, I think it's just, and unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. You and I are about the same age, and we were blessed enough to grow up without social media. Like, we are the last generation, Generation X. Maybe I'm only 6 months by Generation X, but I still claim it 100%.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When the street lights came on, that's when you came home. Like,
you go in.
Nobody you had to call off a landline. My mom would be like, call me when you get to so-and-so's
I did have a beeper, but
Oh my gosh. We had a car phone. My mom,
we did.
One of the big, huge, and it was like she had it installed in the car so that she could
in the console
find her kids. Yeah. Oh, way back. I was in high school when that came out. Yeah.
Yeah. I was too. We had one in the station wagon, the big, like, wood paneled station wagon. We had
did it have the
cell
third
phone in the
seat
console
that you sat backwards?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. The whole 9 yards.
Yeah. So there's some advantages to being in your 40s right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, jumping back a little bit to the whole idea of being in your 40s, like I said, I have a lot of women that follow me, and some of them I think that they're open to the idea of doing some HRT, but they don't really have any idea of how to start, where to start, what to look for, what are the symptoms that they would be having that would make them want to start, diving into that avenue.
Yeah. So hormone replacement therapy is a broad topic. So I always start with that. Usually people freak out because they immediately think HRT, estrogen, that's bad. I'm like,
Cancer,
no, hormone.
The whole study.
Right. The whole study, the Women's Health Initiative. But really HRT, hormone replacement therapy, covers all the hormones. I mean, there's progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, thyroid medication is considered a kind of hormone replacement therapy. Obviously, estrogen can fall in there as well. So as women get into perimenopause, usually they just feel off. They're like, my cycles are off, my mood is off, my energy's off, my sleep is off, everything is off. Maybe they're starting to gain weight around the middle. They're noticing a shift in what their skin looks like, the ability to gain muscle or not, their hair quality, their hair loss, et cetera, et cetera. And it just sort of compounds. And so I recommend testing, like, let's see where you're at in some of these, including thyroid, including glucose, including insulin, including, your ovarian hormones, cortisol, et cetera. And then we can work to address from there. So some women are comfortable with progesterone, and that's where they want to start. Other women are like, I have no libido. I can't gain lean muscle. My mood is low. I'm not motivated like I used to. I'm like, great. Would you be open to DHEA and or testosterone as well? Estrogen, some women are like, give me the estrogen. I want all the things. I feel terrible. I'm having hot flushes, night sweats, brain fog, joint pain, all the things, and vaginal dryness, eye dryness, skin dryness. I don't want this anymore. So what gave estrogen the super bad rap was a study called the Women's Health Initiative, the WHI. And it was a really unfortunate study. There are a lot of follow-up studies since then, a lot of retractions. Various authors in the study have come back, have stayed in research and actually showed that like what the WHI said is actually not true. Like they found some just certain things that they claimed were, cancerous or problematic. Turned out it's not the case. The study sample itself were older women. They removed women who had bad symptoms. So if you had really bad menopausal symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, etc., they didn't include you. So it was a very controversial study because after the fact, the science community kind of figured out it was not what what's a good way to say it was. Maybe it wasn't as honest forward as we would have liked, as women. But anyhow, when they came out and said is, hormones cause cancer, stop immediately. So overnight, all these women stopped their cancer or stopped their hormones for fear of cancer. And as we know, and I say this over and over and over again, we know that cancer is a complicated process. You cannot single-handedly blame estrogen for cancer. You can't. It's not how it works. If that was the case, you guys have estrogen, I have estrogen, young women have estrogen, like everyone has estrogen.
Yeah, everyone has
then
it.
The amount of rates of cancer due to estrogen would be astronomical. And so it's much more complicated than just estrogen. And I understand when people are very mad and they're very upset around, well, I went on HRT and then developed breast cancer. I'm like, well, actually, cancer is a long time coming. It's the microenvironment of breast cancer as an example of the breast tissue. You cannot single-handedly blame estrogen because you had it your whole life. So I don't think it was the HRT. Now, what they did find was the synthetic progesterone, known as a progestin, did absolutely increase the risk for cancer. So most of the time, that's not given now, except in certain situations.
Really yeah.
But the estrogen only arm of the study did not increase breast cancer. Now subsequent studies using estrogen and progesterone, which is bioidentical, is not showing that either. So there's a lot of new research subsequently just leaning towards hormones. These hormones are not actually the thing causing breast cancer. It's just not it. And so I know that's hard for a lot of women to hear. And unfortunately, a lot of pharmacies haven't updated their information at all. They still give you the whole pamphlet around the WHI and tell you be careful of breast cancer. And it's like, get with the times. And a lot of the big organizations around hormones in the conventional world still sort of lean towards the old way, like just be careful of hormones, it might cause cancer. And it's really unfortunate because, like I said, a lot of studies have come out since then to be like, turns out it's giving estrogen or giving progesterone is not the cancer causing evil that we were told back with the WHI. But it's a big head spin for a lot of women who grew up in that era, or who grew up with mothers or aunts or grandmothers in that era and saw really awful things. Yeah. What we know now, of course, is, and there's a lot of research in this too, is the super important role that estrogen plays in our brain health and our bone health and our heart health. And so when all those women, after the study came out and they stopped their hormones overnight, the rates of cardiovascular disease, heart disease is actually the #1 killer of men and women. It's not cancer. It's not breast cancer. That can kill. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the #1 killer is cardiovascular disease. Well, we know estrogen can help. It's protective for us as women. And then we lose that protection as we get through menopause. There's a great researcher right now, Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who's studying the female brain. She wrote the book, The XX Brain. And she's thankfully really looking into estrogen and its effect on reducing the risk for dementia and Alzheimer's in women, because once we go through menopause, our risk goes up, that being one of the reasons. There are several, but that being one of the reasons. And then bone, we know with osteoporosis, when do women get osteoporosis? Well, they get it when they don't cycle anymore, whether they're menopausal or whether they're young. And like, think of your runner, your high school track runner who hasn't had a period. Think of your gymnast who hasn't had a period in a year and they're starting to get bone fractures and, things like that. And it's affecting their bone because they're not getting that cycling hormone. So now the argument in some circles is being made, yes, if you're concerned about the risk of cancer, which I understand, cancer is the big C word, but what about cardiovascular disease? And what about dementia? And what about bone health? And so I'm paying really close attention to these studies because I feel like brain, heart, and bone outweigh for me cancer risk, knowing that cancer is a complicated process.
Right.
And I'm
it's
going
a
to
mitochondrial disease, right? I mean,
coupled with
it's
environment, the microenvironment of all the toxins
Right.
that are affecting it.
Right.
So I'm doing what I can for me personally, just like you. Over time, it wasn't overnight. I didn't have the budget to like magically make myself as clean as possible. It took years. And so that's what I'm, working on, to knowing that when I need hormones at some point, I'm probably going to do them.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, I've been honest with my group members. I'm like, when it comes time for me to start taking hormone replacement, I will do it. Honestly, I will do it. And there are a lot of people I feel like the alternative low carb space. There's my listeners have heard me say this before, but I get really frustrated with people in their like mid 30s. It's like these NTPs in their mid 30s. And the men that tell these women it's bad, it's horrible. And then I have women that are, like I said, that I talk with, that I've done consultations with, and they're in their early 50s, late 40s. And they're like, I'm really depressed. I can't sleep. And I'm like, look, you're checking all the boxes with circadian rhythm. You're checking the boxes with diet. You're checking the boxes with exercise. You're just doing all the right things. I really feel like you should be open to doing some hormone replacement. I feel like and take the shame out of it and see it as like, it's necessary,
Yeah. The ones that drive me nuts are the educators who say, well, menopause is a natural phenomenon. So we need to learn to embrace it. And, that drives me nuts because I worked for a hormone lab for 9 years and I saw a lot of perimenopause, menopause women, especially menopause, that were below the menopausal range. So they weren't even in their own range. They were way below it and feeling, just like you said, miserable. And listening to some of these folks, and they would come and they would say, well, Carrie, like, what vegetable raises estrogen? I'm like, no, none of them do. That's not how it works. Yeah.
What supplement can I take?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, vitamin E. And again, a lot of these supplements and foods can help manage symptoms, but if you actually want to increase your levels of estrogen in menopause, you need to be taking estrogen. That's how it works. Now, there are things called phytoestrogens, and they are very, very, very weak estrogens. So think of like soy or hops. There's a couple other things that bind to the estrogen receptor and very, 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 very mildly activate it. So you'll like black cohosh. You'll hear a black cohosh. Oh, I took black cohosh to help my hot flashes. Yep. I'm like, totally, because it's very, 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 very weakly binds to the estrogen receptor and activates it. So it takes the edge off. It can like really bring down the symptoms. Now, is it potent enough to prevent you from having osteoporosis? No. Is it potent enough for improving heart health? No. Is it potent enough to like really affect the brain? No. Like that's hasn't been really been researched, and we're finding like if you want those benefits, you actually need the thing, which is estrogen, known as estradiol or E2. So I love the herbs and I love the nutrients, and I'm all for eating as healthy as you can. But just like you said, if you're doing those things and you're 10 out of 10 suffering, I'm like, you're probably below the range. Like you're probably too low for you at your age. Don't feel shame in it. Support yourself and live your life.
Yeah. So one of the questions one of my ladies had was, how do you decide if you should take it? My guess would be like testing, correct? What would your guess be?
So I obviously it's testing, history, and then symptoms. So obviously there are people who are not candidates for HRT. Sometimes people will misunderstand me. I say I'm a fan of HRT. It doesn't mean I'm handing out like Oprah hands out cars. Like I hand out HRT for the right person, right? So if you have a strong family history of cancer, you yourself have had a history of cancer. Like if there's something, you've blood clotting issues, it depends on the type of the route of administration. So it's a pretty thorough history that before I decide just to put you on any kind of hormone. And I know progesterone's over the counter and DHEA's are over the counter. They're still hormones. And people screw themselves up all the time because they, like read a blog,
too much.
Just jump on in, and then then they're like, well, hormones doesn't work for me. I'm like, well, when you DIY it, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, you're right. So, so I do thorough history, and then we do blood work, our lab work, and then take their symptoms into account. Yes, because there's a difference between I'm just feeling a little off, like I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm not sleeping quite as well. It's kind of that I'm they're like, all right, maybe we can start with, maybe you don't need hormones. Like maybe we can start with the sleep hygiene, mitochondrial support, adrenal support, et cetera, minerals, like the things you're kind of getting deficient in. Let's see if that will help you. And it'll, at the very least, it'll prepare you as you get older. And then is women are starting to say the moderate to severe, when I'm like, can you like rate that out of, 0 to 10? And they're like, oh, my hot flashes are an 8 out of 10. My night sweats are every night I'm soaking through my pajamas. My vaginal dryness is so bad, everything hurts. My joint pain has gotten so much worse because I'm not, if you're not as lubricated, you're not going to be lubricated in the joints either. So as my brain fog is really, really bad. My depression is bad. I'm like, all right, I'm sorry, vitamin E is not going to fix that. Black cohosh is probably not going to fix that.
Right. Exactly. So symptoms, getting a history, and then, what's the best route for a woman to try to find a practitioner they can trust? That was another question that I had. What do you recommend?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of routes. One, ask your friends, right? Because if ask around and see if they know, do you like your practitioner? Is it helpful? Are they helpful? Do they do telemedicine? Because obviously nowadays telemedicine is so popular, it's so easy compared to what it used to be. There's a couple of resources you can look up. So I'm biased. I used to work at the Dutch Test. And so if you go to dutchtest.com, there is a find a practitioner link. You can type in your zip code and they can also get you telemedicine practitioners as well. There's another website, ifm.com or ifm.org. IFM stands for the Institute for Functional Medicine. They have a find a practitioner, so you can find a functional medicine practitioner. Now, these sites are not personally screened. So it's not an application to be on these sites. It's you maybe have to fulfill some things like certification or sign up or, so many tests, what have you, but you still have to do your due diligence, check out these people. So when you type in your zip code and you get 6 people back, check out their reviews, check out their website, check out their social media. Do they resonate with you? Do they even focus on hormones? Just because they do functional medicine doesn't mean they do hormones. So, do your due diligence and be okay to not like the doctor or practitioner, and to find somebody else, and be okay that you're adding to your healthcare team. So for example, if your OBGYN doesn't really get hormones the way you want them to, it's totally fine to keep them as your OBGYN and add in somebody who does understand hormones. If your primary care doctor is like, I don't really do menopause, or do you want the pill? And you're like, no, then it's okay, but you like them as a primary care. They're great in acute care stuff, not a problem. Keep them and then just add to your healthcare team. There's no shame in that either. I think some of us, we kind of feel guilty. Like, oh, I don't know. Can I cheat on my primary care? Can I cheat on my OBGYN? I'm like, it's not cheating. You're adding. It's not their area of expertise. It's okay.
Right. Exactly. And, is there an advantage to going different routes for bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, like pellets versus patches? Do you have a preference on those, or is it just going to be different for each person?
It's different for each person. Now you will find some practitioners, for example, you have to be trained to do pellets. I was never trained to do pellets. I did not do pellets. But if you go to a pellet practitioner, they're going to probably recommend pellet because that's what they're trained in. Right. And so what I always found was it's a little bit different for every person, and it's kind of different for their situation. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're like, I want topical progesterone. I want a cream. I want progesterone cream. But they had children late in life. And sometimes the children like snuggle in bed with them. Maybe they're young enough, they're co-sleeping. Like anything topical, when you rub it on your arm or wherever you rub it, you will transfer it. So if you are skin to skin a lot with your children or your partner, with topical is probably not the greatest idea for you. Vaginal. Women are like, I'm having vaginal dryness. Sex is painful. Okay, we're going to use vaginal estrogen. It's called with E3 estriol or vaginal DHEA, but you can't use it as a lubricant. Your partner can't pick it up. Like you don't want to transfer that to your partner, which then does take out some of the spontaneity. Whoever your partner is, you just don't want them to pick that up. So I take all of this into account when I'm asking, because sometimes somebody's like, I'm new to hormones. I'm nervous. I've never done it. I'm not sure. I'm like, ooh, then a pellet is not for you. Because once the pellet is in, the pellet is in. Like I can't get it out. Yep. And you have to ride the side effects if you have any for a good 90 days. So let's ease into hormones. Let's try a patch. Let's try the progesterone pill. There's a lot of options and then we will go from there. So do I feel like there's like an number one, the best form? A lot of educators will say yes. A lot of educators will swear by a certain form. And I just, having done it for years, I'm like, nope, I feel like it's person specific. Some people did great with the vaginal. Some people hate it because it didn't work or because it was goopy. Some people like topical. Others are like, this is too much. I hate rubbing this in all the time. Some people don't like the patch because the adhesive annoys them, And so once we find the right cocktail mix though, then it's life-changing.
Yeah. That's thank you. That's awesome.
And it's the same for men on testosterone. I ask the same questions, right? There are topical testosterones and, so hormones are fat loving. So you rub them into your skin and they go into your adipose tissue but they also can be picked up. So let's say your male partner rubs testosterone onto his body and then grabs the sink to wash his hands. And then you come behind him or your children come behind him and use the same sink and touch the same handle, you can pick up testosterone. Or let's say he applies his topical testosterone before he works out in the garage and he goes out and sweats and sweats and sweats. And then you or, the children are out there playing with him. You can pick it up from him. And I've seen it a lot.
Wow. That's crazy.
So you have to be really careful if your male partner is on a topical type of testosterone. That they can also spread it to the family if they are not careful. So hand washing, how they hand wash, when they apply it, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. And then, I know this is like a big topic, so we don't have to go deep on it, but I have one lady who she says that anytime she goes under 20 grams of carbs per day, and she is on thyroid medication too. She's on like T3 and T4, I think. Mm-hmm. But anytime she goes under 20 grams of carbs per day, she starts having night sweats and like all the menopause symptoms start coming up. But if she stays over that 20 grams of carbs, does maybe a little more low carb or just eats carbs. She doesn't have that. So do you think that that's like it? I know it's case by case basis, but do you see that commonly with some women that going more keto and restricting carbohydrates can actually exacerbate menopause symptoms or perimenopause symptoms?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. So carbs are really important. Well, for a lot of reasons, but for some of the reasons are even just the making of our neurotransmitters. Like some of the vitamins, right, that are in carbs, and the making of our neurotransmitters. So if we're not getting carbs, if we're not getting enough, then it could cause our like serotonin to struggle, or even maybe our, dopamine or some of these others. And now you're menopausal, so you're already deficient. And then you've cut carbs way down. And if you're genetically built not to be low carb, then you're going to struggle with the brain neurotransmitters as well. So now you're deficient in hormone and you're starting to become deficient in the brain stuff. And hot flashes and night sweats start in the brain. The signal happens in a part called the hypothalamus. And so and those brain hormones like serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, they play a role in our hot flashes and night sweats. And so yeah, it's also why women who do cycle, if you are what we call cycle syncing. So as you move past ovulation into the second half of your cycle, the luteal phase, your body is essentially nesting. You're your uterus is getting thicker because you may or may not be trying to get pregnant. Your progesterone is going up. And so a lot of the experts will say you should be increasing your carbs at this time because you're supporting your body who's nesting, and essentially, and making progesterone. And if you are strict keto, for a lot of women, or very low carb, for a lot of women, it can actually disrupt that. And so it can disrupt the progesterone production, and it can therefore then disrupt the way your uterus builds itself. And then that can affect your period. It can affect PMS. It can affect your sleep. It can affect your mood, et cetera, et cetera. So you will hear a lot of these cycle syncing experts talking about, or fasting or intermittent fasting experts, like if you have a cycle, be very mindful where you are. As you get close to your period, step out of fasting, step out of the long intermittent fasting, do add in some more carbs. Your body will thank you. I'm a prime example. I have done keto. I've tried it, and I am are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I'm a starving bitch. And so I was telling a friend of mine who does a lot of genetic interpretation, and he was like, "Oh, you can't," without even knowing, he goes, "You can't do keto. Like, you will not do keto very well. Genetically, you won't do keto very well. You need a little bit, not like I don't need to be carb heavy, but he's like, you just need a little more carbs because the way I process or make or use, I forget now, my vitamin B6."
I was going to say B6.
Yeah. He said the way that I genetically do B6 isn't 10 out of 10. It's kind of broken. Okay. So he's like, you actually either need a lot of B6 or, keep your carbs when you go low carb, but don't add in the B6. He said, I bet you're mean. And I'm like, I'm very mean. I'm not a nice person. And B6 is part of the process to make progesterone and to make serotonin and to make all these other hormones. So
yeah, it's tough, because I have I have a lady that's been seeing me and she's like, anytime I go carnivore, I feel great. Because she has a lot of digestive issues, but I lose my period. And I'm like, then we need to work around that, because if you lose your period, that's a major problem. And I am all for people figuring out what diet works best for them. And carnivore can be great for some people. Keto can be great for some people, but over the years, as I've worked with more people and just talk with more people, I'm like, people saying that when they cut carbs, they start having these issues. Like, that's a real thing. It's not because they're doing it wrong. It's like there maybe is like the B6 issue that you have. There's other things at play. So I think sometimes people need to hear that. And
And I understand it's hard when you're in a group or a Facebook group or something, and you see, a large percentage able to do it, no problem, no issues. And you're the one who's like, what the heck? I'm mean. Like, why am I so mean? And everyone is loving life. Like, I don't get the brain clarity. Everyone does fasting and keto and gets this immense brain clarity. Never had it. It drives me nuts. I feel so gypped. I'm like, what the heck? Why don't I get the brain clarity that everybody gets? Genetically, it's not going to happen for me. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah. And I do. I love it. It's wonderful. But I have other clients that, like, one of the ladies I was working with, she couldn't get her blood sugar to regulate as long as she was keto or carnivore. Mm-hmm. We added in some potatoes. We added in some healthy carbs, and her blood sugar is beautiful all of a sudden. And it's like, okay, well then, and she's like, I want to do ketosis. Everyone says how good it is for you. I'm like, but you're doing so good. Look at your blood sugars. Look how well you're doing. Like, it doesn't matter if you're in ketosis or whatever, you're doing great. Yeah. So I think women, especially, we need that permission to just figure out what works best. And these hormones and aging and all this stuff is like, we really need to open the door and just give women a little bit more permission and stop trying to conform to what this influencer says or that influencer says, and just find what's best for you. Right.
Which is why I like all the feedback stuff, whether the wearables, right? If it's in your budget, I am a fan of Aura, or I do Aura. Some people do Whoop, the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors. I have a Lumen. Do you know what Lumen is?
I've got one of those. Yeah.
So I have a Lumen, and my Lumen, if I can be, really carnivore heavy, and my Lumen's like, nope.
You're in sugar burning.
You're in sugar burning. I'm like, what the heck? And then I adding more carbs, even though it says not to, because Lumen's like, you have to cut.
It'll tell you to eat Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm like, bitch, I did cut carbs. Like I'm still a sugar burner, and I will add in carbs. And the next day Lumen's like, you're a 1, you're a 2. And I'm like,
you're in fat burning mode. You're
riddle
like,
me
I
this,
just ate a sweet
Batman.
potato.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you know what? I'm here for it. Genetics. Like, we're just going to roll with this is what works for me. And that's
Yeah.
totally fine. So I think the influencers and, the social media and podcasts and blogs, they're like a good start. If you don't know where to start, it's a great start, but you're still an individual and it may not work for you. But you got to start somewhere in some of these. So
yeah, exactly.
It's helpful, but it's not written in stone.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I had one more little question before we wrap up. One of my ladies wants to know what you think of the copper IUD.
Ooh, the copper IUD. So personally, my body expelled 2 of them. So the copper IUD, my uterus does not love the copper IUD at all. So the copper IUD is not hormonal, of course, but it is copper. So if I don't really have a problem with the copper IUD. I don't really have a problem necessarily with either of the IUDs. I just warn against the other IUD, the Mirena. It's likely going to have a lot.
Me like the
way more
worst
side
cystic
effects.
acne. It was horrid.
Yes.
I had to go to the dermatologist and get lasered off. And she's like, do you have an IUD? And I was like, yeah, I have Mirena. She's like, get it out or you're going to be back here in like a couple months. And my gynecologist is like, it's not the Mirena. I'm like, 100% dude.
Yes. Women either love the Mirena or they hate the Mirena. That's what, there's no middle ground. There's no like, I don't know. And it's usually one or the other for sure.
Yeah.
I do like the copper a whole lot better. I completely understand some women freak out because they're like, oh, it's copper and that's going to affect my estrogen. It's going to affect my zinc balance. Maybe it might. On testing, working for a hormone company for 9 years, I can tell you, I did not see the estrogen imbalance that gets talked about all the time. With a copper IUD, Dutch test doesn't look at zinc, so that copper zinc have to be in a ratio. So that's entirely possible that you may need more zinc when you have the copper IUD. But of course, the side effects of the copper could more cramps, heavier periods because of the way that the copper IUD works. But the nice thing about the copper IUD is if it works for you, you can keep it in there for 10 years. So you can set it and forget it. And your period may or may not be a little bit heavier and your cramps may or may not be a little bit worse. And I generally don't mind the copper IUD. Like if I had to pick one, if someone's like, I need a birth control, it can't be abstinence and it can't be rhythm method, like pick one. It's usually the copper IUD that I pick. Yeah. Not perfect, but it's like the best of the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned
with the Mirena, I don't mean to cut you off with the Mirena.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I don't mind the Mirena. Again, for those subset of women who love it, they have no issues, they have no problems. They go 5 years, they feel great. I'm like, well, God bless you. Right. Like good for you. But for I'd say a lot of women have the same symptoms you do. Greasy hair, hair loss, cystic acne, back pain, mood swings. And it usually happens right away. Yeah. It happens after about 2 or 3 years. For some reason.
It was 2 years in. It was exactly 2 years in that my chin was just horrid. And I'm like, I've never had acne. I was lucky. I didn't really have it as a teen, didn't have it. And then all of a sudden in my 30s, I'm like, got a chin full of like pus-filled acne. I'm like, what is this?
And it's hard to correlate because you've had it
because you've had it for 2 years.
So you're like, there's no way it's the IUD. I've had it for 2 or 3 years. For some reason, I used to insert them. So there's no switch, but I feel like the IUD, that's like a switch, and it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, let's screw this up. Or like all the hormone just dumps out somehow. I mean, it's so weird how it works.
Yeah. Well, my younger sister actually got pregnant with the Mirena IUD.
My old neighbor got pregnant with the Mirena IUD. Yeah. And it was in the baby's forehead.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Delivered.
They took it out right before she delivered. It was in there till the day the baby was born, and they took it out like right before the baby came
I think
out.
Was her 3rd or 4th kid. So her delivery was so quick by then that.
This was her first child. So
out came the IUD.
Yeah, though it's and for me, with birth control, I think it's a very underrated and under talked about thing to understand your cycle. And after I got my Mirena out, I did try to go on birth control, and I had even worse side effects. Even with the lowest dose of birth control, I was like nauseous and moody, and I just felt terrible. And so I haven't done birth control since my early 30s. I had to kind of learn like, all right, you can only really get pregnant these few days a month, and like just kind of time that, which I know is risky for a lot of people, but once you really kind of understand how your cycles work, and you can only really get pregnant a few days a month, it's another alternative, the fertility awareness method, I think, that doesn't get talked about.
You do have to be, as you said, you have to be diligent.
You have to know what's going on.
You can't follow the books, meaning like the books will tell you ovulate on day 14. Definitely not true for every woman. And your left and right ovary are sisters, not twins, which I fully recognize twins are sisters, but like lefty and righty are not the same. So lefty may ovulate on day 12 and righty might ovulate on day 18. Like until you follow it month after month after month after month, then you won't know. And lefty and righty don't always go back and forth. I'm a right dominant person. I can tell my right ovary is ovulating out of 12 months of the year, righty probably goes 8 or 9 of them. I can feel, I feel the cramps. I feel it on the right side. When I've had ultrasounds before, like when I got my IUD out, she was like, oh, it looks like it's on the right side. I'm like, could have told you that. And so, but not everyone knows. I mean, a lot of women don't have any symptoms with ovulation. And so you actually, but so then I'm like, okay, let's track temperature, track cervical mucus, right? Like track these things, do an ovulation predictor kit, and start to track month after month and try to find a pattern and do that route.
Yeah. The Aura I had a friend helpful.
Very helpful. Yeah. And I'm really glad Aura, I don't have any financial ties to Aura, but I got on them because our temperature would go up, right? So once
and then they would say, oh, this is bad, your temperature went up. I'm like, bitch, because I ovulated.
I know. Or like especially during COVID, I was like, that's it got me. I'm dead, I'm dying. And then it was like, oh wait, no, I'm just a woman who ovulated. Just biology. That's all right. And so I posted some stuff on social media, and at the time I knew some people who worked at Aura, and they are predominantly, at the time, they were a very like male tech driven company. And they have now, of course, we have period tracker and period predictor on there. And they've really sort of turned around, because so many, especially during COVID, so many women were like, am I getting sick or am I ovulating? Like, what am I doing? And now Aura, I'm like, oh, thank you, Aura. But once your temperature goes up, you have ovulated. So that's, so for fertility purposes, if you're looking to get pregnant, you have to have had the sperm in there, because you need them in there just prior to ovulation, not necessarily that after ovulation. But if you don't want to get pregnant, then make sure there's no sperm in there.
Exactly.
Before ovulation.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, you've been so generous with your time today. And we've talked about so many awesome things. I really appreciate this. Where can people find you if they want to follow you and your awesome social media and just more of your work?
Instagram, I am at dr.carriejones, and I am just starting to get onto TikTok. Oh,
I know, me too. I don't want to.
But so I'm starting to make that migration. So I'm at Dr. Carrie Jones there as well. And then I am the head of medical education at Rupa Health, so rupahealth.com, or you can find me at drcarriejones.com. So quite a few options.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I'll make sure I link all that in the show notes. And it's just been awesome chatting with you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. This has been fun.
You're so welcome.